Persuasion by Jane Austen. Chapter 7. Very few days more, and Captain Wentworth was known to be at Kellynch, and Mr. Mungrove had called on him, and come back warm with his praise. He was engaged with the Crofts to dine in at Uppercross, and by the end of another week it had been a great disappointment to Mr. Mungrove to find that no earlier day could be fixed, and so impatient was he to shew his gratitude by seeing Captain Wentworth under his own and it welcomed him to all that was the strongest and best in his cellars. But a week must pass, only a week, in Anne's reckoning, and then, she supposed, they must meet. And soon she began to wish that she could feel even secure for a week. And Captain Wentworth was very early returned to Mr. Mungrove's civility. She was all of a calling there in the same half hour. She and Mary were actually setting forward for the great house, where she afterward learnt there must be inevitably had found him, and when they were stopped by the eldest boy's being at the moment brought home the consequence of a bad fall. The child's situation could be entirely certainly aside, and she could not hear the escape with her indifference, and even in the midst of a serious anxiety which they afterward fell on his account. His collarbone was found to be dislocated, and such an injury in the back, and as loose as the most alarming ideas. It was an afternoon of distress, and had everything to do at once. The apothecary was sent for, and the father to have been pursued and informed, the mother to support and keep the hysterics, and the servants to control, the young child to banish, and the poor suffering one to attend and soothe, besides sending, as soon as once she recollected it, proper notice from the other house, which brought her a sunshine of rather frightened, inquiring companions, than of very useful assistants. Her brother's return was first comfort, and she could take best care of his wife. The second blessing was the arrival of the apothecary. Till he came and examined the child, their apprehensions were worse for being vague. They suspected great injury, but knew not where. And now the collarbone was soon replaced, though Mr. Robinson felt, and rubbed and looked grave, and spoke low words to both the father and the aunt. They still were all to hope the best, and still be able to part and eat their dinner in tolerable ease of mind. And then it was, just before they parted, that the two young aunts were able to so far digress with their nephew's state, as to give the information to Captain Wentworth's visit, and staying 5 minutes behind their father and mother, to endeavour how perfectly delighted they were with him, how much handsomer and infinitely more agreeable they thought than any individual of their male acquaintance, who had been all a favourite before, how they had been to hear papa invite him to stay for dinner, and how sorry when he said it was quite out of his power, and how glad again when he promised to reply to papa and mamma's further pressing invitations to come and dine with them on the morrow. Actually on the morrow, and he had promised it in so pleasant a manner as if he felt all the motive of their attention, just as he ought. And, in short, he had looked and said everything with such exquisite grace, and they could all assure them their heads were both turned by him, and off they ran, quite as full of glee as of love, and perhaps full of Captain Wentworth than of little Charles. The same story and same raptures were repeated when the two girls came with their father through the gloom of the evening to make inquiries, and Mr. Mungrove, no longer under the first easiness about his heir, could have lived to leave out his confirmation and praise, and hoping there would be now no occasion for putting Captain Wentworth off, only to think that the cottage party, maybe, would not like to leave the little boy. To give him the meaning, oh no! As to leaving the little boy, both the father and the mother were too strong and recent alarm to bear the thought. Anne, in the joy of escape, could not help adding her warm protestations to theirs. Charles Mungrove, indeed, afterwards, shewn more of an inclination. The child was going on well, and he wished so much to be introduced to Captain Wentworth, and perhaps he might join them in the evening. If he would not dine from home, then he might walk in for an after. But in this he was eagerly opposed by his wife, said, "Oh, no, indeed, Charles, I cannot bear to have you go away, only to think if anything should happen." The child had a good night, and was going on well the next day. It was It must be a work of time to ascertain that no injury could have done to the spine. But Mr. Robinson found nothing to increase alarm, and Charles Mungrove began, consequently, to feel no necessity for longer confinement. The child was to be kept in a bed and amused as quietly as possible. But what was there for a father to do? This was quite a female case, and highly absurd to him, who would make no use at home, to shut himself up. As a father, Mary very much wished him to meet Captain Wentworth directly, and there being no sufficient reason against it, he ought to go, and it ended making his bold public declarations when he came in from the shooting, this meaning to dress directly and dine at the other house. Nothing can be going on better than the child, said he, and I told my father just now that I would come, and he thought me quite right. Your sister is being with you, my love, and I have no scruple at all. You would not like to leave him with yourself, but you can see I can be of no use, and will send for me if anything is the matter. The husband and wives generally understood when the opposition will be in vain. Mary knew, from Charles's manner of speaking, that he was quite determined on going, and that it would be no use to tease him. She said nothing, therefore, till he was out of the room, but soon, as there was only Anne to hear, "So you and I are left to shift by ourselves with this poor sick child, and not a creature coming near us all the evening. I knew how it would be. This is always my luck. If there's anything disagreeable going on, men is surely to get out of it, and Charles is as bad as any of them. Very unfeeling, I must say. It is very unfeeling of him to be running away from this poor little boy. Talks of his being going on well, and does he know how he's going on well, or that there must be a sudden change half an hour hence? I did not think Charles would be so unfeeling. So here he is to go away and enjoy himself, because I am the poor mother, and I am not allowed to stir. And yet, I am sure I am more unfit than anybody else to be about the child. And my being the mother is very reason with my feelings why I should not be tried. I am not equal to it at all, and you saw how hysterical I was yesterday. But that was only the effects of the sudden calmness of your alarm, of the shock. You will not be hysterical again, I dare say. We shall have nothing to distress us. I perfectly understand Mr. Robinson's directions, and I have no fears. And indeed, Mary, I cannot wonder at your husband. Nursing does not belong to a man. It is not his province. A sick child is always the mother's property, and her own feelings make it so. Well, I am fond as my child as any mother, but I do not know that I am any more in a sick room than Charles, for I cannot always scolding and teasing the poor child when it is ill. You saw this morning, and if I told him to keep quiet, he was sure to be kicking around. I've not nerves for this sort of thing. But you would be comfortable yourself to spend the whole evening away from the poor boy? Yes, you see, his papa can, and why should I? Why not I? Jemina is so careful, and she would send every word every hour about how he was, and I would think Charles might as well have told his father that we were to come all alone. I am not more alarmed than little Charles than he is. I am dreadfully alarmed about yesterday, but this case is very different today. Well, if you're not thinking it too late to give yourself, suppose you were to go, as well as your husband, leave Charles to my care, and Mr. and Mrs. Grumble cannot think it wrong while I remain with him. Are you serious? Cried Mary, as her eyes brightening. Dear me, that is a very good thought. Very good indeed. To be sure, I may well just go as not, for I am no use at home. Am I? It only harasses me, you know, who not to have a mother's feelings in great deal of prosperous persons, and you can make little Charles do anything. Well, he always minds you outward. It will be a great deal better of leaving him only with Gemma. Oh, I shall certainly go, as I am ought, if I can, as quite as much as Charles. They want me to excessively to be acquainted with Captain Wentworth, and I know you not mind being left alone. And an excellent thought of yours, indeed, Anne. I will go and tell Charles, and get ready directly. You send for us, you moment know, and moment's notice if anything is the matter. But I dare say there is nothing that'll alarm you, and I should not go, and you may be sure, if I had not quite the ease of my dear child. The next moment she was tapping at her husband's dressing-room door, and Anne followed her upstairs. It was time for the whole conversation, which began with Mary saying in a tone of great exultation, I mean to go with you, Charles, for I am no more use than at home if you are. If I was to shut myself forever with the child, I should not be able to persuade him to do anything he did not like. Anne will undertake and stay at home and take care of him. It is Anne's own proposal, so I shall go with you, for it will be a great deal better, for I have not dined at the other's house since Tuesday. This is very kind of Anne, was her husband's answer, and I should be very glad to go with you. But it seems rather hard that she should be left alone by herself to nurse our sick child. Anne was not out of the hand to take up her cause, and sincerity for her manners soon sufficient to convince him, while their conviction was the very least agreeable, and her farther scruples as her left dining alone, and he still wanted her to join them in the evening when the child might be at rest, and kindly urged her to let him go and fetch her, and she was quite unpersuadable, and this being the case, she had ere long pleasure of seeing them set off together in high spirits. They were gone, she hoped, to be happy, however, oddly struck with such happiness might seem. As for herself, she was left with many sensations of comfort, as were perhaps ever likely to be hers. She knew that to be first utility to a child, which was heard if Frederick Wentworth was only half a mile distant, making himself agreeable to others. She would really like to know how it felt as to a meeting. Perhaps indifferent to cause under such circumstances he might be indifferent or unwilling. He had wished he would see her ever again, and have not waited till this time. He would have done what she had not but believed in this place that should have done long ago, when the events had been early giving him the independence of which alone been wanting. Her brother and sisters came back delighted with their new acquaintance. As for their visit in general, there had been music, singing, talking, laughing, that was all most agreeable. Charming manners in Captain Wentworth, no shyness or reserve, and seemed to all know each other perfectly. He was coming into the very next morning to shoot with Charles. He was to come to breakfast, but not the cottage, though that had been proposed first, and he had pressed to the house instead. He seemed afraid of being in Mrs. Charles Mungrove's way, on account of the child, and therefore somehow they hardly knew, it ended up in Charles being to meet him at breakfast at his father's. Anne understood it. He wished to avoid seeing her. He had inquired after her. She found slightly that it might form a slight acquaintance, seeming a knowledge as she had a knowledge, and actuated, perhaps, by the same view of an introduction as they were to meet. The morning hours of the cottage were always later than those of the other house, and on the morrow the difference was so great that Mary and Anne were not more than beginning breakfast when Charles came in and said that they were setting off, for he was to come with one of his dogs, and his sister was following Captain Wentworth. His sister is meaning to visit Mary and the child, and Captain Wentworth also proposing also to wait on her for a few minutes, if not convenient, although Charles had answered for the child's being in no such state that would make it inconvenient. Captain Wentworth would not be satisfied without running him giving a notice. Mary was very much gratified by this attention, and was delighted to receive him, while a thousand rushing feelings of Anne, of which this had been most consoling, it would be soon over. It would be soon over. In 20 minutes Charles' preparation and the others appeared. They were in the drawing-room, and her eye half met Captain Wentworth's. A bow and a curtsy passed. She heard her voice, she talked to Mary, and said all was right, and she said something to the Miss Mungroves, enough to mark easy footing. The room seemed full of persons and voices, but a few minutes ended it. Charles shewed himself at the window, and was all ready for their visitor, and was gone. The Miss Mungroves were gone too, and suddenly resolving to walk to the end of the village with the sportsmen. The room was cleared, and Anne might finish her breakfast as she could. "It is over! It is over!" she repeated to herself again in nervous gratitude. "The worst is over." Mary talked, but she could not attend. She had seen him, they had met, and they had been once more in the same room. Soon, however, she began to reason with herself, and tried to feel less. 8 years, almost 8 years had passed since all had given up. How absurd it had been resuming the agitation which such interval banished into distinctness. Why not 8 years do, in every event description, in changes and alienations removal, in all that must be comprised in it, in oblivion of the past. How natural, how certain things too, nearly included nearly a third of her part own life. Alas, with all their reasoning, she found that to her retentive feelings 8 years might be little more than nothing. Now how were sentiments to be read? Was this like wishing to avoid her? In the next moment she was hating herself for the folly which she asked the question. On the other question she had the utmost wisdom and not prevented, she was soon sparse to all of the suspense, for the Miss Mungroves had returned and finished their visit at the cottage. She had spontaneous information from Mary. Captain Wentworth is not very gallant by you, Anne, though he was so attentive to me. Henrietta asked him what he thought of you, when they went away, and said you were so altered he should not have known you again. Mary had no feelings to make her respect her sisters in a common way. She was perfectly unsuspicious to every particular wound. Altered beyond his knowledge, Anne fully submitted in a sign of deep mortification, and doubtless was it so. She could take no revenge, for he was not altered, and for the worst, she had already acknowledged it to herself, and she could not think differently, and let him think of her as he would. No, the years had destroyed her youth, and bloom had only given him a more glowing, manly, open look, in no respect for lessening his personal advantages. She had seen the same with Frederick Wentworth. So altered that he should not know her again. These were the words that could not but dwell with her, yet she began to rejoice as she heard them. They were of sobbing tendency, and allayed agitation as they composed, and consequently must make her happier. Frederick Wentworth had used such words, or something like them, but without an idea that would carry round to her, and the thought had wretchedly altered in the first moment of appeal, and as he felt, had not forgiven Anne Elliot. She had used him ill, deserted and disappointed him, and, or worse, she had shewn a feebleness of character in doing so, which her own decided, confident temper could not endure. She had given up to oblige others, and the effects of over-persuasion. It was weakness and timidity. He had been most warmly attached to her, and never seen a woman since who he thought her equal, but except for some natural sensation of curiosity, he had no desire of meeting her again. Her power with him was gone forever. It was now his object to marry. He was rich in being turned on shore, fully intent to settle as soon as he could be properly tempted, actually looking around, ready to fall in love with all the speed which a clear head and quick taste could allow. He had a heart for either of them Miss Mungroves, and if they could catch it, a heart, in short, for any pleasing young woman who came his way, excepting Anne Elliot. This was the only secret exception, when he said to his sister in all answering suppositions, "Yes, here I am, Sophia, quite ready to make a foolish march. Anybody between 15 and 30 should have maybe asking me for this. A little beauty, a few smiles, and a few compliments to the navy, and I am a lost man. This should not be enough for a sailor who had not been among society, among women to make him nice." He said it, she knew, to be contradicted. His bright proud eyes spoke the conviction that he was nice, and Anne Elliot, not out of his thoughts, was more seriously described in the woman he should meet with. A strong mind, with a sweetness of manner, and made the first and the last of the description. That is the woman I want, said he. Something a little more inferior I shall put up with, course, but not it must not be much, for if I am fool, I shall be fool indeed, for I have thought on the subject more than most men.